Thank you so much, Irina. This was really inspiring. Uh, Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, friends, and students. I'm Joanna Rubinstein, and you already heard about me, so I don't intend to use more of our time and would really like to introduce our first continuing panel of world leaders who really fight for children's rights by doing things. So if I may start by asking Seth Berkley to come up and Stine Bosse. Ambassador Do, Yang Shim, Marta Santos Pais, and our hero Yoshikawa. Thank you so much for being with us here today, and so far it has been really a call to action, very inspiring. But as we heard, we also have to do things, and many of you are very much engaged in doing things. I would like to start to ask Seth, who is one of the doers and has been a doer for many, many years, initially working at Rockefeller Foundation, thinking about how to develop public-private partnerships, and then ending up leading one, which was developing vaccines against HIV. From there, he went on to take over a major global challenge: how do we immunize all the kids in the world? So what I would like us to think about here is what would be the core priorities within our own different fields when it comes to the next set of global goals and when it comes to sustainable development agenda.
So thank you, Joanna, and it's a great honor to be here with so many wonderful leaders. We've done extraordinary things in this MDG period, and one of the things I want to say is it's absolutely critical that we were able to measure what we did, and that's an important point. So, if you look at MDG 4, which is child mortality, we've gone from 12.7 million deaths a year to 6.3 in 2013. That's still 6.3 too many. But if you actually adjust for population, it actually went from what would have been 17 million deaths a year, given the population growth, to 6.3. So we're not on target to meet that MDG, but we've done a lot, and the challenge is how do we accelerate? But what you're asking me to talk about is not so much that MDG 4, but actually MDG 8, which people don't talk so much about, which is how do we create a new sustainable partnership? And for us, the way we are contributing to moving forward, and Agnes, I think, talked well about this in Rwanda, is we work with countries to try to have them take a lead in getting vaccines out to their children. They actually pay for those vaccines. There's no free lunch here. They pay, if they're a very poor country, they pay a little bit. As they get wealthier, they pay more until eventually they graduate. So countries have a critical role to play, and we work with them to strengthen health systems. Like in the Ebola countries, we invested $53 million in those health systems. Not enough to have a resilient and sustainable system, but we all have to come together to try to build those systems. But the other thing we do is we work with the private sector, and these are the new parts of the partnership. So we work with pharmaceutical companies to bring prices of vaccines down. That's important for donor resources, but it's also important to make it sustainable for countries. We work with the private sector on, floating bonds to use innovative finance. We work with the private sector to help improve supply chains and leapfrog with technology. So that's an important part. But lastly, it's an extraordinary in these new partnerships. Our overhead rate is 2.47%. 2.47%. Why is that? Because we work with others. We work with WHO, we work with UNICEF, we work with the World Bank. We don't duplicate. We come together, all of us working together to deliver on this. So for me, whatever the number is in the next set of SDGs, there need to be a relatively small number. I think Her Majesty said this right, children need to be at the center of this. And what's critical is that they are measurable. And let me just finish with one point. We think vaccines are the great success, and it's true. It reaches more children than any other intervention in the world. And the tracer vaccine we use is DPT-3, which is about 83% coverage. So you think 4 out of 5 kids are getting it, we have to worry about the 1 out of 5, and that's true. But if you ask the question, how many children get the 11 vaccines that Agnes talked about, the answer is actually 5%. 5% of the world's kids get the 11 vaccines that WHO has recommended. They are way ahead of the curve. So our role in this next period is to make sure that every child can live to its full potential and is able to live a healthy life and be able to go to school and be able to contribute, et cetera.
So would you say that one of your targets in the next set of goals would be to really not just have every child immunized, but also expand the number of existing vaccines to reach more children?
I mean, for me, the critical issue here is it's about equity. And you know, it's interesting, you go to many poor countries, they don't yet have the vaccines, and you say to the leaders, are your children vaccinated against these 11? And they all raise their hands. Of course they are, because they have resources, they bring them in. It's about giving the science and technology. We have vaccines against the largest killers of children. We have vaccines against cancers, the largest cancer killer of women. We have these vaccines. Why are we not getting them to every person to make, you know, an opportunity for them to live to their full potential? That's the challenge.
Well, thank you, Seth. Stina Bosse, you used to be a big CEO. You come from the private sector. You are definitely an action person, and delivery, that's what matters. And you are trying to bring that to the NGO sector. Sure. You are also a Millennium Development Goals advocate of the Secretary General, and you have broad experience working on projects in developing countries with organizations like Child Fund Alliance right now, of which you are a vice chair. The organization is really trying to see how to standardize the work, how to make those organizations and programs accountable. What do you see as opportunities and challenges, perhaps, as well, with the new Sustainable Development Goals agenda?
I think, first of all, it's obvious what was also just mentioned, namely that the fact that we can actually measure what we're doing is crucial. And for the next goals, hopefully that will be the case as well. More and more NGOs have actually taken on the Millennium Goals to measure themselves against exactly that. And I think that is very, very important and partly what should be a success factor. And then, of course, I think for everybody to think about sustainability and sustainability in development and skipping the children, it's just completely illogic. So having a main focus exactly from a sustainability point of view on the children going forward is for me very crucial and should be obvious. And then, of course, there is a factor in there that if there's anything that we can all claim to have an experience about, it's being a child. We all know how that was, good and bad. So some of these areas to me are very logical also going forward. I think the MDG goals have done a lot of good. And mainly, it's actually made it obvious for all of us that this huge mountain that looked very, very difficult to climb up was actually achievable, that we could do it. And of course, it puts even more focus on what are the new goals, because now we can see for us that we can do it. This has a positive and it has a negative, because it becomes more and more crucial that we choose the right goals. And of course, I think that when we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the factor of quality in education becomes spot on. I mean, working in West Africa, where I have my sort of operational development work, it's so obvious. We've got many children now at primary school, close to all children, but the quality of the education that we there bring to the children is a debate and should be debated. So there we need to do a lot more. Then I think another area that we should really keep focusing on, also going forward, is of course the gender issue and gender equality issues. We now know as a fact, and we should stop debating whether it's right or wrong, we now know as a fact that when we spend $1 in giving a young woman or a woman her own income, that actually floats directly into the family and the society, and it is well spent, and society rises. So we must not forget that. And then finally, also onto your point, equality. We must also talk about equality, because equality matters. It does make a huge difference for development in the society that we actually also talk about equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stina. I think that wearing your hat before as a business person and switching to work with people who want to do good but not necessarily have the right training and skills in terms of how do you execute those projects, your contributions advising these organizations is really critical. Do you think sometimes a little bit more about those public-private partnerships, that this is one of the roles where the private sector could be more helpful, where they usually are not engaged?
Yes, I think there is a, as it was very well said from the Minister of Development from Rwanda, yes, there is a lot to do about organizations and how do you organize this work. But I would also say that there is a lot to be learned the other way around. So partnerships in this area is both ways, because there's a lot of the passion and the engagement and the talking about just humanity, being a human being on the same planet, that businesses could learn from. So a partnership, in my opinion, goes both ways. There is learning from business to the NGO world and organizing all these areas, but there's also learning points the other way.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Doe, I had the privilege of traveling with you and interacting on different levels. I've met you at the meetings on sustainable tourism, where I didn't really understand what has sustainable development to do with tourism, but I learned a lot. And I think now, that was several years ago, nowadays we all understand how important it is. You are also MDG advocate of the Secretary General of the United Nations, and you also run a foundation and supports literacy among children by building small libraries in villages across Africa. And if I remember correctly, you should have more than 160 by now. You come from a country where you reminded us yesterday at the meeting with Secretary General and the MDG advocates that Korea was one of the poorest countries. And you remember even from your childhood how difficult the life was, and that Korea was not fortunate to have natural resources, but it was by determination and collective effort of the nation to educate its children and thereby also get the technology sector to thrive and the country to thrive. You could overcome all those challenges. How do you see now the role of education when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals? And what can we learn from Korea's example?
Thank you, Joanna. Korea perhaps is the only example on earth, I have to say, that we started $69 per capita income. Not 169, it was 69, two-digit. And I was born into that country, and my daughter doesn't like me saying how old I am. I'm 65. And that's how we started. And Korea has enormous challenges, climate challenges, war challenges. We had everything on our plate. And did we have natural resources? No, we don't even one oil of gas, one ounce of oil coming from our territory. But now, I think we are about $25,000 per capita income. You will be if you go your house, you will see a lot of Samsung, LG, and Hyundai, and a lot of people think they're Japanese made. No, they're not. They're Korean made. That's how fast we come about. there's two things. One, education. You know, today we heard wonderful speeches, importance of education. Yes, we're the Koreans, we practiced it. And second, political will. Leader, we had the right leader at the right time. And leaders, I mean, from the president to mother or sister. They were leaders for nurturing their children and their brothers and sisters. Let's go to school. Let's study. That's how I made Korea. So if anybody wants to know about importance of education, just come to Korea. And I'm sure if you talk to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, he will go on and on and on, talk about 24 hours, because he walked 10 kilometers a day to go to school, and so did we. Your Highness, you talked about how you were engaged this foundation. I had my little own experience. Yes, I was United Nations World Tourism Organization and Sustainable Tourism for Elimination of Poverty. I traveled Africa very often. And when I landed Africa, it was like me landing 50 years ago of my country. It was like me taking time machine and go back. And I knew if we could do it, they could do it. There's no excuse why they cannot do it. So to make my story short, I've just organized. I don't build hardwares. I'm not good at building hardwares. We set up Thank You Sumo libraries. We did it 153 in 20 different countries. But here's the thing. Like, this is something Secretary General Ban and we worry. Like our generation, we know what the poverty is. Our generation, we know how to fight poverty. But I look at my Korean younger generation, they don't know because they were born into already affluent society. And when I travel with them, with my young staff, they say, look at Master, look at that. And they think it's strange. And I tell them, look, that's the way I lived. So I think we need to somehow get young generation of developed countries engaged into this and telling them, look, it's not isolated society world anymore. If you have Ebola in Guinea or Sierra Leone, you will get that in your home a week later. And they're so interchangeable society. We have to teach them somehow that they will share and they will carry the torch of saying, we did it, my parents did it, you can do it too. So I think this is very, very important that we have some interchange and interaction. So I love to take volunteers from Korea to Africa, and 9 out of 10, they come back just like same passion that I felt when I first landed in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for these inspiring remarks. I would like to turn actually to Hiro, and who is a professor at NYU, but who is also a co-chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network's thematic group on education, and has been very much engaged in making sure that the early childhood development or education goal got into at least the first proposed 10 goals that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network released a year ago in its report. Right now, we realize that there is a lot of momentum and more voices, and we heard it really from all the leaders today, how important the early childhood development is. As a scientist, an academic, how do you see, how can we translate what we know on early childhood development into policy, and what do you see as really the most important issues that need to be in the next agenda?
Sure. It's certainly an honor to be here and to have worked with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network to bring together the science of child and youth development, which I think informs our report. I think it's, as you said, a very promising time for the field of early childhood development, and I think the opportunity, even in the current language, is to integrate the issues of survival with learning and developmental potential, and that is what I think is one of the most exciting things. We all have to make sure this language stays in there. I think many people, actually everybody in this room, I'm sure, played some of the role over the last year in making sure that early childhood education, but also early childhood development programs and policies more broadly, supplemented, I think, the extremely valuable and world-changing work around mortality issues and vaccinations and those kinds of things. So that's the next challenge. I think what happened was there's a growing recognition that there's a single science. It's a single human science of child and youth development that is informing this work. It cuts across, of course, the neuroscience, emerging information and data that we now know about how sensitive the brain is in early childhood, but also, I would say, in adolescence. There is another spurt of brain growth and sensitivity to environments around the time of puberty, and I think that's a clear link in New York City's investments in early childhood education and then after school in adolescence. We have to think about these issues of early adolescent parenthood and what that often does to interrupted educations. The economics of investment in children, I think we have much stronger evidence than we did 15 years ago. So regardless of whether we're talking about the North American or rich country studies or in low and middle income countries, the benefit cost ratios for quality pre-primary education and for quality parenting programs are quite enormous. They are between 6 and 10 in any country context. If you implement quality parenting programs, quality pre-primary education. But I think the next challenge is that we bring the science of evaluation, implementation, and data systems to bear so that we're not simply working with the basic science, as important as it is, of neuroscience and the biological sciences, but we actually have to harness that science. There does need to be a data revolution in the child area. We need to kind of synthesize that science, and ultimately the SDGs will not have a guide to children. I think we need to bring that together. The different targets that are relevant to children and youth need to be brought together and linked to the guiding principles for implementation, governance, and finance. And that's why I think we need a new level of coordination between the private sector and the public sector, across health, across education, poverty reduction, and child protection. We have to address the fact that 1 billion of the world's children are being exposed to violence and to toxic stress in their daily lives and families and communities.
So we really need to translate some of those global efforts into national plans, which already at that level and even local level have more of integration of different issues.
Yes, the child, you can't separate out these different domains of development. If a child does not feel safe, she will not be able to learn, right? So I think, unfortunately, we silo activities across ministries or within ministries for NGOs working in particular sectors rather than across them. And I think we need to bring, I think the lesson that ECD brings to the field of child and youth development is this need to be coordinated and integrated. And we need to bring that up through the lifespan, into primary and secondary education and into the transition to adulthood and livelihoods.
It's really the continuum. Thank you, hero. I would like to introduce my big hero, Marta Santos Pais. And, you know, we have talked about all those great opportunities right now, great achievements with the Millennium Development Goals. Her Majesty was talking about the abuse and violence against children. So, Marta, you are Special Representative of Secretary General on Violence Against Children. And the world is, on one hand, making incredible progress. On the other hand, we probably have worse statistics than ever when it comes to children being abused, with all the conflicts going on in the world. And I was very moved by the report you released, I think it was in February, on 11,000 children that were killed because of the Syrian conflict and how many of them were tortured. Unfortunately, nobody wants to talk about it. What can we change and what can we do to ensure that we have special measures to prevent violence against children in the next global agenda?
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. I'm very struck by the fact that so many speakers, and starting with Her Majesty Queen Sylvia, placed emphasis on the impact of violence, and just now Hero reminding us of the billion children, at least, who suffer violence in so many forms. I would like to start by saying there is a huge opportunity, and Queen Sylvia reminded us that this year we are celebrating 25 years of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We had a vision 25 years ago of a world where each and every child would grow up with confidence and happiness and feeling he or she belongs to the world. And perhaps in my work, the thing that strikes me the most is that so many children feel they are not allowed to belong there. They observe the world feeling left out, feeling, in fact, pushed out. And because education was touched so often, if we just think about how many girls are raped on the way to school, how many girls suffer sexual abuse in school, how many boys and girls suffer bullying and humiliation, and that pushes families to feel frightened and to keep children out of school. That leads boys and girls to, in fact, not going back to school. And if we think about one girl, as Irina Bukova was mentioning, who is in fact, who becomes pregnant as a result of this, the first temptation is to leave school. But in still so many countries, the law, in fact, forces the girl to get out of school. So there are so many things that, in fact, we need to address. But throughout these years, violence has been very invisible, and we need really to put it at the center of our considerations. Not to say that violence is everything in the new agenda, but we cannot afford to forget how much violence has an impact on rates of child mortality, on rates of maternal mortality. Early pregnant adolescents very often think suicide is the answer because they are not accepted by their families, their friends, their society. I'm coming from a meeting with children with albinism, just to give you that example, in so many countries around the world, especially in Africa. In so many communities, they are felt to bring bad luck. As a result, their limbs are cut and sold for someone in the black market to gain money just to be lucky in a local election or in having a fertile agricultural crop. So dramatic perceptions are still very rooted in society. And recent reports by so many colleagues in the UN, just signal how dramatic this is. A few quick, 8% of the homicide victims are children below 15 years of age. It's huge. 90% of those who die are dying not in conflict situation, but in peaceful situations. So it's behind the door of the home. It's in the school. It is in care residential centers. It is in juvenile justice institutions. It's dramatic and pervasive. So we need to really expose it. But I think we have a great opportunity with the dreaming of the new agenda. First, certainly preserving the attention to violence against children. I believe it's very encouraging to see the wide consensus that has been built around the world through the many national consultations, thematic consultations, so many discussions in the UN, but in the local communities, very far from New York and very far from all of us, where everybody is saying, this is my first concern, and especially children are saying this, and that's what I would really like to stress. We have thousands of children who have been involved in this process, and they identified two priority concerns. The first one is education. Education, sense of belonging, dreaming of becoming something that they deserve to be. But at the same time, education as a tool to prevent violence, intolerance, stigmatization, exclusion. So a great tool to bring equity, as so many of you have mentioned, for instance. But the second thing is bringing violence to an end, because this is affecting their development, their health, their education, their sense of belonging and citizenship. And they know exactly what they want to see happening in the agenda. They say, we would like a priority which is clearly reflected in the agenda, and we want it cross-cutting in education, in gender equality, in safe cities, in so many areas that we keep talking about. So I think the vision is so present. There is wide consensus, but as several speakers before have said, we need to really join hands, because this cannot be compromised, and many need to keep the pressure for this not to be forgotten in the ambition, which is legitimate, of perhaps making it more manageable if we think the number of goals or targets. But as we learned from the MDGs, in countries where violence is pervasive, the sustainable development goals will not be achieved. So this is just the key for success, I think, really.
Well, thank you so much. I wish we had more time. I would like to thank all the panelists and give a round of applause to everybody. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Henrik Holmqvist from the Global Child Forum. Oops. I'm sorry. I will introduce you and then you can introduce Joachim. Apparently a change in program. So it's a great opportunity for me to introduce Joke Brandt, who is Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. And please, Joke.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, thanks so much for being here, and thank you to you and the government and the people of Sweden to be such great champions for children. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and students, as others said, we hope that you will pick up this agenda and run with it, and preferably even faster than we have. Also, thank you to Jeff and the Earth Institute, to Columbia University, and to the Global Child Forum for inviting me. It's great to be here among so many great colleagues and friends, and allowing me to say a few words to this audience. As Jeff, as you just said, it's all about children and it's all about the future. But let me take you back 2,500 years ago, when the Chinese philosopher Confucius actually advised his students to study the past if you would define the future. And so today, while we're here and work together to envision a better world for children post-2015, I think it would be wise to follow his advice. As others said, we have the upcoming 25th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and I think that gives us an opportunity to do exactly that, learn from our past to inform our future. And I think, as Marta just said, the CRC envisioned a better world. It revolutionized the way we thought about children and childhood, and its 54 articles articulate every child's right to health, to education, has been emphasized by so many people, a stimulating, secure environment, and free from want. In short, everything they need to ensure their dignity, to survive, and to thrive. So the question, I think, is, has the CRC made the world a better place for children? To answer that, UNICEF has looked at 25 years of data and presented it in one publication. And what the publication shows is that there are impressive gains, as others have also pointed out, because indeed children are far more likely to go to primary school, and the under 5 mortality rate has dropped by nearly 50%, as has the proportion of people living in extreme poverty. And more children benefit from access to safe water, sanitation, and nutrition, and are able to participate in matters that affect them. So the world is a better place for children today than it was 25 years ago. But, and I think that's an important lesson, that we need to take into the post-2015 discussion, not for all children, not for the children who live in rural villages or urban slums, or in communities torn by conflict or catastrophe, or for those who are victims of discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, disability, or religion, nor for children who have little hope of escaping the poverty into which they were born. So we cannot claim that children's rights are being upheld when serious violations are inflicted upon children every day, boys recruited into armed militia, girls raped and married off to strangers, or when 250 million children fail to learn basic literacy or numeracy despite attending school, or when half of all children in low-income countries still live in extreme poverty, or when 17,000 young children die every day, largely from causes we can prevent, and when 1 in 4 children in least developed countries is engaged in child labor. And let's not forget that behind all these statistics is a child whose rights are violated, whose dreams to be a nurse or an engineer or a teacher or a model for that matter are not being fulfilled. So while we debate the SDGs and celebrate how far we have come, which we should, let's also remember that when talking about sustainability, progress is not sustainable until it's achieved universally. And let us also not forget that the world in which the CRC was written is vastly different to our world today, where there are more mobile phones than people, and personal computers are commonplace, where major conflicts rage, humanitarian crises grow, and climate change wreaks havoc on the most vulnerable, and where the world is increasingly urbanized. The debate around the future development goals is a chance to take new challenges for children into account, to reflect on our successes and failures, and to invest in all children by placing them at the center of the post-2015 agenda. With the CRC inspiring us, we can, and so we must, erase the inequities that rob children of their rights and thereby threaten global development goals. So what does that mean for the way we work? Well, certainly not business as usual, and I think others have already pointed out that, with the political will, and we actually know what to do. So let me just focus on one issue, and that is the importance of investing in innovation. Innovative tools, innovative thinking, and innovative partnerships. This means trying, and sometimes failing, but learning. And it means enabling communities to create their own solutions. And it means keeping pace with the latest developments and adapting our programs so that we can reach those now forgotten by the MDGs. The latest findings around early childhood development, and we've heard that discussed just in the panel, I think are a great example of such new thinking. Because as recent science has found out that during the first years of life, the majority of a child's energy actually goes into forming those connections in the brain, which determine a child's future physical and mental health, capacity to learn, and future success. And it was also found that to develop optimally, the brain needs proper nutrition, like breastfeeding, and stimulating activities, like reading, and healthy interactions, like cuddling, and of course, protection from violence and abuse. In short, what these findings underline is the importance of investing in all these areas of a child's development, starting from the very first days in life when inequities begin and when they can also be prevented. Another example of innovative thinking and new partnerships is YouReport. First developed in Uganda, YouReport is an SMS-based service that uses real-time information to inform programs, and it enables policymakers and local partners to ask questions to more than 250,000 people. So how does it work? When answers to a question, what would you feed a 6-month-old baby, range from breast milk to fish, it clearly points out which communities need further support. But your report isn't just about receiving information, it is also about creating real-time information loops so that we can meet requests with action. With a local developer in Zambia, we adapted your report to connect young people to HIV counselors. And we failed. And the feedback we got was our messages were too formal. They sounded like old people. So we enlisted young people to write new messages. And the result was that 50,000 new reporters were recruited, and a rise in voluntary testing rates among them from 20 to 43%. And why? Because they had found out that you better ask the questions anonymously. The next step we're taking is to take your report to scale, enabling partners around the world to benefit. And earlier this week, UNICEF launched Rapid Pro. And just think of that as a kind of open source app store for international development, where apps like your report, but also others, and not just created, of course, by UNICEF, can be downloaded. We are planning in the near future to launch apps for registering children after emergencies and for tracking health supplies, and we hope that many more will follow. And I strongly believe that it's this kind of thinking and these kind of partnerships that we must embrace if we're to define a future in which we will deliver on our promise, our commitment for children's rights. Because 25 years ago, the CRC set a high standard for humanity. It compelled us to think differently and act decisively on behalf of children everywhere. And now, as we engage in discussions around the post-2015 agenda, let the promise of the CRC and our commitment to it inspire us, not to work even harder, but also to be daring and to think innovatively to reach the most marginalized. And looking around this room, I think we have that commitment, and I think we have the partnerships to make it work. So I'm really excited about what I think we can achieve for children together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joka, and thank you to UNICEF for all the fantastic good things that you are doing all around the world. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, all friends in the House. The Minister of Rwanda said, just do it. Now it's time for us to really look how we should do it. And for that, I'm really happy to introduce to you 5 excellent new panelists from different perspectives, all very market-driven, and all focus on achieving partnerships. We have a world leader in disaster preparedness and public health that teamed up with superstar Paul Simon to combat poor health of kids here in New York City. We have Irvin. We have a tough businessman who runs a corporate foundation in the best interest of the children, with exciting partnerships with both the UN agencies and NGOs. We have Per Hegenes. We have an extremely exciting new initiative from the clothing giant H&M. That went out to the public with an open election on what they should support. Really interesting to follow their development. Helena? And we have one of the brightest entrepreneurs out of Sweden that, instead of building a private company and earning a private fortune, started a lottery that gives over $200 million a year to the NGO sectors. Please, Nicholas. And last but not least, we're extremely happy and fortunate to have Mr. Corporate Sustainability of the United Nations in the House. Thank you very much, Georg, to join us also here today. Global Compact, with over 12,000 corporate participants and stakeholders in over 145 countries in the world. So, what do we hope to learn here today? One thing, of course, that comes out of mind is how do we break the silos? How can we work more in partnerships, and how can we achieve more? How do we get different actors from different sectors to trust each other and work together in the best interest of the child? Because we want action, we want concrete results, and we want good practices and great examples. And that is the challenge that I'm asking you all to think of today. I think we'll start with you, Per. Everyone knows about IKEA, the informal Swedish embassy of the world. IKEA Foundation now, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, always conscious, very child-focused. You advocate for UN agencies and other organizations to think more like business, to approach challenges differently, to drive innovation, to look for smarter and more cost-effective ways of getting things done. So, Per, do we see any progress on that? Do we see any? I mean, UN agencies is not the first thing comes to mind when talks about progress organizations.
Oh, there's a lot of innovation happening in UN agencies, some of which we have been part of, try to drive, and some that happens without our help, but we just to make it visible and make it come to the surface and make sure it helps drive change in policies. So I think your question was really about innovation, about how we change, and what we're trying to do at the IKEA Foundation and IKEA is really keep things simple and never be happy and satisfied, but look for ways to improve all the time. That's part of the culture, and that's the culture we try to instill with our partners as well, and that's going really well. So we're on a track there. I think there's so many things that private sector business can do to help work together with the government, with UN organizations, and with NGOs to help improve on the issues that we just discussed this morning. I will try to give a couple of examples because we try to keep things simple in our organization. So instead of talking about the general stuff, I can give you a couple of examples. And the first example is something that every single business in the world can do, and that is starting to adhere to what's called child rights business principles, which is a concept framework, probably the most comprehensive framework that was ever developed, together with business, Save the Children, UNICEF, and Global Compact, to actually lay out the guidelines and recommendations for how businesses should act in their work to protect children's rights and enable children to have the kind of opportunities that we talked about this morning. So every business can do that regardless of which business you're in. You can do it for your own business, for your own employees, for your supply chain, and if you do that, you can achieve amazing results for children alone by doing that. The second example is really business can help work with organizations to drive innovation, think differently about how we establish systems and structures and sustainable and scalable programs to address issues such as health, education, and livelihood development that will all benefit children over the long term. Even in a crisis situation that we're facing in West Africa today on Ebola, I think there are limits to how much funding that can come out of the bilaterals. Today, everyone is stretched, and I think the business needs to stand up and take their part of the responsibility and provide funding for these great organizations that are on the ground trying to fight an increasing epidemic with very limited resources. And we see this every day. It's about the resources, about boots on the ground, about resources to be able to actually stem this tide. And that's something private sector should think about as well as the bilateral. So let's look at this as a call to action to the private sector. A third area is really about taking knowledge, taking experience that exists in the private sector and apply it together with organizations, with NGOs, with governments. As I said, gave a good example of how Gavi works with the pharmaceutical industry and the financial industry to provide solutions and access to cheaper vaccines for children in the poorest areas of the world. That's a good example of a cooperation between an organization and private sector to find solutions that otherwise wouldn't be available. There's lots of opportunities for any company to take their experience, their knowledge, and engage, such as we do at IKEA when it comes to the area of logistics, for example, helping the logistics with the UN and other organizations to operate more efficiently so they can reduce cost and provide more money against the people, and especially the children they're trying to help. There are huge opportunities in the technology sector, and I have several colleagues who work very hard from the technology perspective to drive efficiency and create opportunities matched with technology that otherwise weren't there, and therefore provides better quality to the people we're trying to help. Any company can find an opportunity to do that if they look for it. The fourth area I wanted to talk about is really market access. For certain companies, it's possible to create market access and drive livelihood development in a way that benefits children. So an example for us, for example, is we have programs to empower women in poor communities in Asia, especially in Asia, in India. And we empower women and give them opportunities to have an income stream that didn't exist before. We work with IKEA to provide market opportunities and use them as an incubator to sell the products that the women will manufacture in the local rural communities. And by creating that market access in the beginning, we can help build businesses that over time will be sustainable for these women. And why are we doing this? What does it have to do with children? Well, of course, we know that if women have the opportunity to make money, they will invest it in children's health and education. And that's how we indirectly use women's empowerment to improve the lives of children in all the communities that we operate.
You talked about the children's rights and business principles. And Georg, you were one of the founding fathers of the principles, and with strong leadership and with the help of Ursula and your colleagues really got that through. How do you feel that these questions are being taken on today? I mean, we did a study with BCG not very long ago, released at the Global Child Forum at the Royal Palace in Stockholm, where it showed that the knowledge is not that big. We still have a long journey to go. But what is your feel? How do you feel in your 12,000 companies and in all over the world? How are these being taken on?
Thank you very much, and allow me first to say that I think nobody should underestimate the fundamentally important role of business in shaping values, in behavior, and in impacting the prospects of children. It's at the workplace, in the community, in the marketplace. And as foreign direct investment now is 5 times ODA, that role continues to grow. And as business development is embraced by all countries around the world, it is fundamentally important that business itself, the way it conducts itself, drives forward values that support the causes of children and other priority issues of the United Nations. And this is why the Compact was launched initially. Just to remind everybody, there are 10 principles covering human rights, workplace, the environment, and good governance, anti-corruption. It wasn't until 2010 that we embarked seriously on the causes of children, and Her Excellency, Her Majesty Queen Silva of Sweden has really given us a big push on your forum in collaboration with UNICEF and Save the Children. The children's rights and business principles are now well known, so to speak. We rolled them out in 40 countries. Just 2 weeks ago in Uganda, another country launch is upcoming in UAE, I believe, mostly conducted by our country networks. The Compact now has 80 country networks, and this creates enormous awareness. Then comes the next step: how does business actually practically change its own behavior? It's how business makes its money, which is the most important footprint on development, and how does it collaborate with others. And here there's some encouraging news, at least that's what we hear back from many countries. The children's causes are increasingly mainstreamed in the corporate sustainability agenda. The future marketplace is seen in children, so being responsible, not doing harm, and supporting is seen increasingly as a value. And that is very important because it speaks to the self-motivating forces of the private sector. So we have to drive these principles far deeper into the business behavior. There are many tools out there now in many languages. We're very proud of this. It needs to be owned locally as well as driven, pushed globally, and that is key. And I do want to refer to this new website, which is joined by all partners who are working with business, the childrenandbusiness.org website, where all tools in many languages are now available. But clearly, long way to go. On a personal note, allow me to say the following. In the end, it's about values and ethics and the willpower to make things happen. In the end, business people are people like everybody else. You find in all companies real champions, and that is great. And Sweden has given us so much motivation, frankly, in this area. But we need to spread this value-driven business behavior far wider and far deeper. With 8,000 corporate participants currently, this is just a fraction of the 50,000 publicly listed companies. There are tens of millions of private companies and small and medium-sized companies, so there's still a long way to go, but the momentum is growing. An encouraging side news is that investors increasingly pay attention to these issues. They integrate it into valuation and decision-making because bad behavior should be punished and should be a risk, and that is increasingly recognized, and good behavior should be rewarded. And there's a huge movement going on in the institutional investor community currently, Principles for Responsible Investment, which recognize that this kind of behavior has material implications for long-term behavior. In short, financial success increasingly is tied with social responsibility, environmental stewardship, and good governance. But to get this really into the marketplace on a massive scale, we need to do much more. And maybe the young people here could actually challenge all those companies which are still sitting on a fence and basically free riding on the value dimension, and challenge them. Why aren't you integrating the children's rights and business principles into your strategy and operations? Still much to be done, but global interdependence offers the opportunity to work with business on a massive scale and to also deliver solutions on a much bigger scale than ever before was it possible.
Excellent. I urge everybody to go into that website and look at it. It's a fantastic tool and a good inspiration for companies on how to really work with these questions. I was sitting at the audience at a conference a few months ago, and one of the speakers said, no matter how well written a declaration might be, it can never excuse us from doing real work. And that was you, Niklas. And symptomatic, very hands-on and very market-driven. Could you briefly explain what you do, how you do it, and how that brings so much to so many people around the world in need?
Of course, and starting from the value-driven business behavior that you were looking for, let me give you the picture. 1950, on a dirt road in the townships of Soweto in South Africa, a 12-year-old boy is running around kicking a food can because he can't afford a football. And his life is lacking a lot. It's lacking education, economic wealth, but it's not lacking love. And therefore, his childhood, when he looks upon it, is a decent childhood. He became a very strong young boy. And one day he stood in Sharpeville, standing up for his child rights and his human rights. And they were standing in front of the police, and they shot right into his group of friends. 9 of them were children, 69 were killed. Helped by the local business, the global NGOs, and the Royal Kingdom of Sweden, he was greeted and accepted to get a second chance in Sweden. And he got an education. He married a Swedish woman, and he got some own children, and I am one of them. I think business leaders are just people, like you said. And therefore, if there is a will, there is a way. Our way has been to run a business. We call the concept market-driven charity. Normally, you take a business, and if you're a good player, you take a few percentage off to support NGOs that do good in this world. Our way has been to take a few percentage for the private profit so we can reinvest in the business to expand it and take the entire profit and donate it into the NGOs of this world. And therefore, this tiny business who sells lottery tickets and TV game shows, things that you really don't need, is being sold on 2 small markets in Sweden and in Holland. But on the other hand, donating 100% of the profit made us the second largest private initiated donor in the world after Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So can we have an impact? I think we can, not by ourselves, but together with the NGOs. And therefore, the partnerships with the NGOs is the key here. We know how to make money, but we don't know better than the receiving end how to implement it. So therefore, you can say that, and I'm going to give you 2 figures. That's the only thing you have to remember. Since we started, we have injected in local grassroots NGOs and global NGOs like UNICEF, Amnesty, World Wildlife Fund, and we're happy to work together with Jeffrey Sachs and his leadership, $6 billion. And that's only from 2 markets that we're profitable in. Imagine if we had 20 markets. Businesses have 3 things that I think are truth. First of all, we have an unbureaucratic decision system compared to politicians and policy makers and institutions. Therefore, we can be very, very quick in making decisions, so we can be a catalyst. Secondly, business leaders, yes, we are obsessed. We are obsessed with measuring things. We love measuring things, and I think we should continue doing that, measuring results. Thirdly, just because we have a big wallet, I don't think we should decide how the receiving end should implement things. I believe strongly that the business community should take the opportunity to not mix up the urge of measuring the results and steering the funds. We believe strongly in unrestricted funds. If you believe in the leadership of the receiving NGO, then you can invest in that leadership. If you don't believe in the leadership, don't go there. So that's what we have a huge opportunity to do, and I urge other leaders to actually follow up on that. Now, I was inspired by H&M and their leadership now, and how they go from their global agenda straight down to a small but important initiative in Harlem. And I was emailing some of my colleagues in Europe now, and I asked them, what is our commitment 2014 for children, for education, for health, for children's rights? And it will be, by the end of this year, 250, here comes the second figure. First one was 6 billion, remember. This is the second one, $250 million that we will commit for children through NGOs.
Jumping straight down to the local level then, and to the city of New York. Irvin, plans of coordinated actions are required in all geographies, and particularly to reach the most vulnerable and at-risk children. How can coordinated actions and innovative partnerships among different players make a difference globally, but also just a few blocks away from here in New York?
Thanks. You know, the United States and New York City in particular are very enigmatic. No one around the world thinks of us and thinks of an impoverished country, which comes down to this principle that Mayor de Blasio ran on,
which talks about the tale of two cities or the tale of two countries. And the fact of the matter is that as recently as 2 weeks ago, I was trying to explain to a new corporate partner from outside the United States why it is that America has this ingrained, stagnant reality of not only inequity between two ends of the spectrum, but a growing inequity. And it's very complex. And our challenges here are really great. 1 in 5 American children live in poverty. 1 in 4 children in New York City live in poverty. Another 30% of New York City's children live in families who are near poverty. And they are literally blocks from here, an easy walk from here. As of July, there were 38,000 reports of potential child abuse and neglect just in this city, nearly 3 million a year in the United States overall. 2 months ago, I got personally involved in a situation about a report that that revealed that children as young as 7 and 8 years of age were working in the U.S. tobacco fields in 4 different states in the United States to, quote unquote, help the family income, et cetera. So I want to get beyond this notion that we do have or don't have tremendous problems in the United States. We absolutely do. And one of the things that in my role is at the Earth Institute in our program on child well-being and resiliency, in addition to our foundation, the Children's Health Fund, is we try to take microcosms of the challenges and find solutions to working with those, but keeping in mind the big picture. In a sense, we think locally and think globally simultaneously. That's our MO, basically. But I will tell you that it would be virtually impossible to do what we do, which is direct services in a very collaborative way with other service providers, solve problems. It would be impossible to do this if we were dependent on any one sector alone. It just simply does not work. 85% of the infrastructure in the United States is in the private sector's hands. It is an imperative that we're all in this together, not only for the practical reasons, but also for the message that it matters to all of us and to our futures that we solve these massive problems. I want to say a couple of things about the stagnancy of situations in the United States. At some level, our poverty is invisible in a way that it is not in a developing country. It's here, it's just not focused on because people are looking at the other data points, for example, that show the economic success stories. But intermixed in there is a growing population of children who are not growing up as we'd like them to be growing up and are not going to be able to fulfill not only the American dream, but the dreams they have for themselves. 1990 or 1991, as a pediatrician, I was seeing a child, very impoverished child, at a shelter for foster children in Brooklyn, New York. And I walk into the back examining room and I meet William, a 10-year-old kid, who's obviously a poor and distressed child. And in the course of my usual pediatric banter with the child, I said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And William said, "I want to be a paleontologist." And I gathered myself together and I said, "William, what is a paleontologist?" He said, "Somebody who works with dinosaurs and is interested in, finding new dinosaurs, et cetera." And I said, "Well, that's right. And how do you know about that?" He goes to his pocket and he takes out literally a yellowed, wrinkled article from the New York Times a year before that somebody had given to him about paleontology. And after I got over my speechlessness, I thought about this child before me in an examining room in a shelter in Brooklyn, and thinking about the chances of this child actually becoming a paleontologist and the barriers that confronted him compared to the barriers that did not confront my own children and my grandchildren and everyone else in my own social circle. I tried to track him, but he was in the homeless system, and I never did. And one of the big regrets of my career is not being able to follow William to see if he's on the road to becoming a paleontologist. But the bet is that he's not. And that fact is a major problem for America and for the world. And I guess I just want to resonate with this concept of all of us rallying around the critical, central importance of every child being educated as the way to give every child a chance that goes to every corner of this earth. And all of us who do whatever we do, whether we're working on clean water or working on healthcare, it's like in a big motor race. We have pit stops. We're in the pit stops. The goal of us is to keep those engines tuned up and ready to make it to the finish line. My job as a pediatrician, keep this child healthy. Your job as an educator, keep them educated. Your job as in government, make sure the policies and the resources are there. But at the end of the day, the winning idea here is for children to grow up safe, educated, and ready. Ready for what? Ready to fulfill their own dreams, ready for the world, and ready to make a difference in a positive way in the next generation. This is why the rallying cry around education is so critical here. So the final point I want to make is, so when it comes right down to it, what do we need to do? Well, we need to find partners like the H&M Conscious Foundation, because they immediately resonated with what we were suggesting. Let's take a few schools in some very poor areas of New York City and do what we need to do so that the teacher in front of the class is at least not worried about health issues that are barriers to learning. And this is the key here, to find those resonant partnerships that will make a difference in individual lives and that are imminently replicable and scalable, so that at the end of the day, we can all pat each other on the back and say, we're making progress towards educating the world's children. It starts locally, but we're thinking globally.
Excellent, thank you. Helena, I would like to come over to your side and ask you, you are now the head of a new foundation, and with a very household name, of course. Everybody have something, probably from IKEA, not from H&M. You are totally, and you are bringing a lot more than nice clothes and a charming supermodel to this place. You're bringing in a very new concept, and I would like you to just briefly explain the thoughts behind it and how you want to do it. I find it very interesting the thing of actually going out to your coworkers and customers, asking them to put your focus for you. Please.
Thank you, Henrik. Yes, the H&M Conscious Foundation, just like Alec Weck was talking about earlier, is quite new. And we really want to drive impact and try to change the lives of people and make a difference as much as possible. So we have identified 3 focus areas that we do 3 large global programs within. And just as you said, Henrik, we actually invited the H&M customers and employees to help us select what were those 3 main areas that they thought were the most immediate. And they are education, clean water, and strengthening women. So what we try to do is try to create impact for children on different levels. So if we look at our education program, what we do there is we try to focus on the early years, so early childhood development and early learning, because we know through all the facts that this is where you can make a huge difference in the foundation of a child to make sure that the child will continue to go to school and learn. And Alec Weck was also talking about the specific program we're doing with UNICEF in this matter. And then if we go to our second program, which is clean water, if children then have a good foundation to learn, we want them to stay in school. And this can be a problem when kids become teenagers, if there's no clean water and sanitation in schools, especially for young girls when they menstruate. So then what we do is we want to provide clean water and toilets to school to really make sure that kids, especially girls, can finish school. And then when we look at our third program, which is about strengthening women, if a girl finishes her school, which of course we want her to do, we want to empower her when she becomes a woman. We want to make sure that she is not locked down by the barriers that hold women back. And we want to strengthen her economically by making her able to earn her own money. And we do that through skills training or also seed funding through a lasting change fund that we have. And when women start to work and they start to make their own money, they need someone to take care of their kids. And then we're back in our first program. So they're all very interlinked, and they sort of follow a child through different stages and different levels. But of course, to have an impact, we also need to change policy work. So that's why in each of the 3 global programs, we really have a core element of policy change, so that we can create settings for this change to happen and have an impact on children. And then we have to work with large organizations who can drive that change, like UNICEF, for example. And of course, as you mentioned then, we have a fantastic opportunity because we're linked to H&M, one of the largest fashion companies in the world, and we have a great platform from which we can talk and advocate about the rights of children. And we can do this by including young people all over the world because we believe that young people should be included in this. So on the platform of H&M, we can talk about what are the needs of children, what can we do to make a difference, and show positive stories of change. So in that, we hope that we can sort of make some difference for children.
Excellent. I had about 10 pages of follow-up questions to you all. Sadly, I mean, we are running out of time, and I need to thank you all for your participation. And I would also like to urge, I mean, the people that have questions and the ones that are staying behind and have the opportunity to stay a couple of minutes after this, please don't hesitate to grab anyone and ask them your question. And with this, I would like from Global Child Forum to thank Joanna and Jeff, the Columbia University Earth Institute and the SDSN for a brilliant collaboration. I think we'll do this next year again, not the least so I can use all my questions, but also that so we can follow up on this. And with this, I would like to thank you, and I would like to give the floor to Jeff Sachs to finalize this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wow. For the students here, that was pretty special, actually. You've seen the world's leaders of promoting children's well-being before our eyes today, and we've been able to host them here, which is an incredible privilege. And I also want to thank our students for their commitment, because they are deeply engaged in all of these issues at the Earth Institute, in many startups, in many activities, in magazines, in forums, and so forth. So could we up front give a hand for the children, the children and the students who support the children. You're doing a great job, and we're very proud of our students here. We've come to the end of a remarkable group of presentations. Of course, we covered a lot of ground very quickly because we talked about a lot of subjects, health and education, the role of business, changing technology, the threats, the challenges, the post-2015 world. And I move that we do convene again next year because it will be the occasion of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's convene and celebrate children at the heart of the SDGs next year and continue to work together to plot our way forward. We're going to announce formally very shortly this wonderful partnership with the H&M Conscious Foundation and the Earth Institute and the Children's Health Fund. So that's very exciting. We'll have a press briefing shortly about that. This is a wonderful project, and we're really deeply thrilled to be working together with an H&M Foundation on this. The final bit of business is that we would like to have a statement of our joint commitment come out of this meeting. And it's a little bit tricky to spring a statement, which you haven't even seen yet. But I'm going to read bits of it, take a general acclamation, and then we're going to put it online and email it to all of you for really some edits and wordsmithing and so forth, and within a week have a formal statement to come out of the meeting together. So this is a statement called Children in the Age of Sustainable Development, a Joint Commitment, and I'll just read a little bit of it to give you the idea. It has a preamble, core principles, and investing in children, an action plan. Children embody the hopes of humanity. They are our future, and we pursue sustainable development on their behalf. And then there are lots of footnotes, this being an academic community, so I won't read the footnotes. Children have the right to thrive, develop to their full potential, and to live in a sustainable world. Fulfillment of child rights is the moral and legal obligation of all governments. It is also the smartest investment that governments can make. Investing in children is essential for achieving all aspects of sustainable development. Children are the future workforce and drivers of economic growth and development, and are also the future guardians of a sustainable world and its natural resources. Investing in children is the indispensable investment. Core principles. 1, holistic development. The goals for children's development go far beyond survival. They combine physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and moral domains of learning and development. We cannot selectively choose one aspect from these. Societies are based on the development of the whole child. 2nd, universality of reach. All children have the right to the best start in life, irrespective of where they were born or where they live. They have the right to survive, thrive, and realize their full potential without fear of violence, abuse, neglect, maltreatment, or exploitation. And 3, multi-generational development. Childhood represents the period of life up to 18 years, with different age groups having distinct needs and wants. Child-integrated approaches should target initiatives across this span in a manner consistent with the evolving capacities of the child. There is also a need for a multi-generation program that promotes primary caregivers' parenting skills, physical and mental health, human capital development, and poverty reduction, as well as direct health and education supports for children and youth. And then how must we act? First, to foster cooperation among governments, international organizations, business, philanthropy, and civil society actors to support the realization of children's rights. Second, we agreed to create an international impetus to raise global resources for children everywhere, and to program these funds at the national and local level from both public and private sources of funding to maximize the impact of every dollar spent. 3, to support the mobilization of adequate official and private development assistance to facilitate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, with an emphasis on the new and effective pooled financing mechanisms for children's health, education, and nutrition. 4, to coordinate programs and policies across health, education, nutrition, violence prevention, and social protection in an integrated manner. 5, to prioritize the needs of primary caregivers and families to strengthen their education, learning, and physical, mental, and economic well-being in tandem with direct support for the empowerment, participation, and welfare of children and youth. And 6, to coordinate the assessment of initiatives both within and across sectors and strengthen the evidence-based research, harnessing real-time data through the use of technology where possible to understand what's working, what's not, and how we can replicate and scale up the highest impact interventions. So we would like everybody to be signatories to that. Hearing no objections, we adopt it by acclamation, but we will circulate it for everybody to read with care. I don't know if the students here registered online and therefore we have your emails, but I would like all of you to sign as well. And so we will find a way to post this and at the Earth Institute so that you can sign on as well. So let me once again thank Your Majesty and thank Your Royal Highness for inspiring us and bringing us together, and thank all the leaders and the future leaders in the room for the wonderful work that you do. And have a good day.